With me today are Merlin Reichel, Eric Boldebreck, and Gert Boss. I'm going to have each of them introduce themselves, starting with Merlin, and then Eric and Gert, so you can hear a little bit about their backgrounds and why they're joining me today on Business of Innovation. Merlin?
Thanks, Chris, and thanks for the opportunity and the invitation today. Yes, my name is Merlin Reichel. I work for a trade association that represents the EU industry, the medtech industry at EU level. It's called MedTech Europe. We have members that are very, very large companies, but also national associations. They have in turn their members, which are small and medium enterprises, but also bigger companies. And at MedTech Europe, I work in the regulatory affairs team where I lead MDR implementation efforts and coordination in collaboration with our experts on the IVDR side. So, and my background is pharmacist. I worked in the pharma industry for quite some time, and now 13 years at MedTech Europe. So thank you again.
Welcome, Merlin. Eric?
Yeah, I'm Eric Vollebrecht. I'm a lawyer active in the life sciences industry with a super specialization in medical technology. I work for, well, just about everybody and their mother in the medical devices and IVD industry. I have the great honor to be have been instrumental in some of the recent policy initiatives, you could say, in the field of medical devices that affected the thinking about the MDR quite a bit, like the initiative of Peter Liese from the European Parliament on the MDR. I've also helped several trade associations with white papers on the subject. And yeah, I could go on for 10 minutes, but I won't. So over to Gert.
Gert?
Yeah, so nice to join you. My name is Gert Bos. I'm one of the partners at QServe Group, a consulting firm in medical devices and IVDs, as well as a CRO running clinical trials, as well as performance evaluations for the IVD field. And so my role in our board is to kind of focus on what's new, the content, innovation, new types of services, and pretty difficult cases. Sometimes we see them, sometimes involving Eric and other lawyers and so on. But it's fun looking to support at this moment over a few, I think 3,500 manufacturers, from very large one to the small startups that are struggling in the system, trying to understand what light versions of technical documentation and simplified quality systems and so on mean. But I think we're getting the hang of that, right? Really supporting that innovative part as well. And I truly believe, and I hope we can spend a little bit of time of that innovation is starting to come back to Europe and is no longer hindered by MDR ignorance, but we really start seeing that people start believing in Europe again as go-to-market.
I completely agree there that we need to talk about that, because I think there's been too much negativity about where we are in Europe today, where we were versus 4 years ago, when it was a real struggle. So speaking of that, where I wanted to start our conversation is about, where we have come from and where we are today. And oftentimes I particularly get very irate when somebody talks about, well, MDR, IVDR, they just came into force in 2021, and the four of us know that the law came into effect in 2017, and then there was full implementation, and then various and sundry ways of trying to postpone it. So let's start with Gert, since he brought it up. What kind of progress, lack of progress, where have we, from where we started on, say, 2021, where are we today?
Yeah, so that journey, I guess, started even in 2007. So people that have been around will know that was the time that we started to change the recast and so on. And so it didn't take us by surprise. But a lot of stakeholders have kind of waited until everything was clear. And I think that is kind of one of the mistakes that since 2021, a lot of people have continued to make, right? We have a set of legislations and they are not all very clear and detailed and precise. And that is the type of law that Europe is building. And so we have to wait. Well, what do we wait for? A lot of people wait for full implementation, thousands of guidance pages, so that they know what to do. But what we see is that the smart thinkers, and some of them are really in that innovative space, they find their way even without the guidance, right? The early adopters, they found their way to get through, right? And so if you're willing and if you're pushing to get through, it's easy at this moment to get your MDR certificate. And I'm not joking. So some of the MDR new innovative products come to market from the first connection to the notified body. 3 months later, they have a certificate. If you're only willing to invest and be well prepared and so on. A lot of people stop still being in that phase of, I think a lot of companies have been upset. A lot of people have been kind of waiting for it to go away, or to be very clear what the minimum is they have to do. And yes, we'll get there. And Eric talked a little bit about the initiatives going on to simplify matters. But in some cases, by just doing what you know you have to do to get your innovative product on the market, it is an easy path forward, right? It becomes more complex the moment that there's no finance, there's no funding, that there is a question, why should we do this for legacy products, right? We already know that these products are safe and performing well. That emotional part basically has been hindering. And I hope that with some of these new initiatives, we'll get everyone on track, like some of these new innovators have found a new way into the MDR.
Question that brings up a question on the legacy products, because I know of companies in ophthalmology in particular where, intraocular lenses for cataract surgery, they've had their notified bodies have come back and said, we need 3-year follow-up data in order to issue your MDR certificates, which doesn't exist because, and so the variation that some of these that is seen right now, I think, is one of the biggest challenges, because it's really unpredictable, and they go back and they'll cite whatever ISO standard, and it's not the case, or the argument is flawed. So in particular, the legacy companies, I think, is at least my impression, that they're having more of a challenge than somebody who's starting fresh out of the gate with a new MDR application.
Yeah, I fully agree with that sentiment, that it's easier for new products. Also, if it's very innovative, if it's AI driven and so on, because there's not a lot of things to compare with, right? So you don't have the backlog of having to show that it's better than we had, or what were the issues in the past and so on. So in that sense, the equation is much easier if you bring something completely new to the market. On the other hand, you say, well, 3 years follow-up on intraocular lenses, that is not existing. But simple argument from notified bodies these days are, well, didn't you have a guidance document published in, what was it, 2012, that said, for the data you don't have, start your PMCF? Well, 3 years follow-up, 12 years after the publication of saying, well, you have to start collecting some of that. Is that too big an ask? That's kind of the very simplified version of what notified bodies are asking. And many have started on that journey of PMCF collection. And then you find that it is very easy to convey a message to a notified body. If you have a few cases, they don't ask for much, but they ask for something. They ask for a start of a journey to be more aware of that real world evidence, of the post-market clinical follow-up, to be part of the continued evidence collection for the future. So it's getting over that hurdle to bring some level of information. And I see a lot of manufacturers have managed to get some, maybe limited quality, but limited information from PMCF survey, higher quality PMCF surveys, into their products. And that might be worthwhile for long-term implants, right? Because you have to do something, because that's where all the concerns have been. Do we have to expect that to be done for every simple class 2A device? Probably not. But for anything that's a longer term implant, I think there's some justification that we need to be looking out for the information. If we haven't done it in the past, then maybe today is a good time to get started.
Yeah, that fair points. Eric, I'm thinking about, that point about justification of long-term data. And was it about a few weeks ago, you posted something on LinkedIn about a company with an orphan technology that was struggling to get past their notified body, and you were taken to task by somebody about not that you were not on the side of safety of the patient. And just I'd like your perception about following up on what Gerd is saying about that impression that MDR is there because patients needed to be better protected, and if we are advocating for changes, are we on the side of less patient safety, which I don't think is the case.
No, I think we're not on the side of less patient safety, but what I think is that with the MDR, it's in the basis in terms of regulatory philosophy and so on. It's a good piece of legislation, but I think that when the MDR was designed, some of the flaws in the system that could have been fixed were not fixed. Then some very, with hindsight, of course, disastrous choices regarding transitional regime were made, typically not to grandfather any devices, but to have all the certificates reissued, and also at the same time have all the notified bodies reaccredited. I remember that Gert and I were talking about it at the time, and that Gert compared it to basically playing the banjo on the roof of your car while speeding on the highway and changing the wheels at the same time, if I remember correctly. So
something like that, yeah.
Yeah. So and then I think there is the issue that with hindsight, there's a lot you can say, of course, and I think this is also something that the European legislator has partially realized, right? You see now the first voices in the European Parliament saying that they overshot the mark with the way they designed the MDR. And I mean, from a legal perspective, I can say that definitely there's a lot that can be improved. But the whole discussion is very much modeled by the psychological process that Gert just described. Basically, manufacturers being a bit like when you want to take your cat to the vet and you want to stick it in the crate and the cat is just stuck in the door. A lot of manufacturers were basically acting like that they really didn't want to and wanted to delay as long as possible. I had a lot of clients at the time asking me, like, how can we delay? And you could tell them, like, well, there are options, but it's not a wise choice. And I think there is a lot that can be improved in the system, and that is specifically has to do with innovation and centralization. So basically, making sure that notified bodies all apply the exact same criteria. And I must say, actually, that it's my impression that everybody is always hating on the notified bodies because they apply different rules. But it is also my experience in practice that in most of the cases, this is not a choice of the notified body, but rather by the notifying authority behind the notified body. Like, for example, why are notified bodies not more helpful in structured dialogues? Well, exactly because their notifying authorities do not give them the room to be more useful. I think this is problematic. And so centralization, there's a lot that can happen there. And yeah, I mean, we are looking at a process now where this is on the table, right? We have the European Commission that has said we have embarked on a target evaluation for which you will see the first proposals end of 2025. Then we have a European Parliament that has said, well, we also want solutions in the short term. We want the low-hanging fruit fixed quicker. And yeah, so basically, I think we'll need to see what happens. I think the next really big pin to stick in your calendar is the EBSCO meeting on beginning of December. And I have seen a lot of lobbying going on behind the scenes already, with everybody positioning themselves to make sure that the member states in that council meeting go the direction that the respective parties want. So either go for low-hanging fruits, either go for maximum delay, depends on your interest, but yeah, everybody's basically on it.
Mhm.
No maximum delay, please. Merlin, from a MedTech Europe standpoint, where do you see things today?
I think I would completely agree with what Eric was just saying. I'm not sure I really share Gert's optimism with regards to the innovation staying in Europe. We have conducted surveys 2 years ago. We have conducted surveys a couple of months ago. We have the results now, and we clearly see that a majority of companies which were choosing Europe as a geography of launch before the MDR don't do it anymore. Obviously not all, but after the MDR. So we see a clear drop in launching products because of the complexity, because of the cost, because of the burden on industry providing data for innovative products. If we talk about these, and these companies go more to other jurisdictions. For example, the US is cited as one of the major ones. And we still don't have an innovation pathway in Europe, which is not the case in other jurisdictions. So again, as I think we're at a very crucial time. Eric was talking about the EBSCO meeting. We have calls from the European Parliament to find solutions. But I guess nearly everyone is sort of agreeing on something needs to be done. Now the question, I think the real question is what needs to be done and when this needs to be done. And Eric was talking about the targeted evaluation, which is starting this year and ending next year. I guess at MedTech Europe, we still see that for us, and maybe more for SMEs than for larger companies, which have invested a lot of money and efforts in training their staff, et cetera, ever since the beginning. But you need a lot of money to do that. So I think SMEs are disproportionately affected by the MDR at the present time and are disappearing. And so are devices. So we need to find solutions. I guess, again, as I was saying, it's when these solutions need to be implemented. And we totally agree with the fact that the targeted evaluation is needed. But what are we going to do until the results are being published? Because if you calculate, it's another year until we have the results of the targeted evaluation. Then these need to be
Another year
tested.
for the procedure.
Another year. And no, these need to be published. These need to be assessed, discussed, and another year. So in total, maybe if it comes to it, even if we need to revise the MDR and IVDR rules here and there, we're not saying that we're completely changing the philosophy or that we aim at completely changing the philosophy of MDR and IVDR, but it's too late. It's in 3-4 years, and by then, many SMEs and devices will have disappeared. And we have a lot of figures that point in that direction. And as I was saying before, we had a survey conducted 2 years ago. Our survey of today confirms these figures, actually. And it's funny, you were saying 2017. I started at MedTech Europe in 2011. I remember that what we were saying almost in maybe not in 2011, 2012, 13, what we were saying back then is happening today. And it's almost not funny, haha, but it's funny in the sense that when we write position papers, or when I write a position paper, I take a lot of inspiration of what has been written 2 years, 1 year, and tradition ago. So that's a bit worrying. So we believe that the house is still burning, that devices are disappearing, and that we need to find solutions short term. But again, also after the targeted evaluation. Maybe we can say a few words about what we have in mind in terms of what needs to happen. But it's really encouraging to see that everyone is pointing in the same direction, saying we need something to be done. Again, when and how is the million-dollar question. But
Yeah,
for
and
us,
I would say the member states are still a bit the dark horse in this whole discussion, because there's also differences between member states. I know that in Germany, they've just finished a major exercise, actually by request of the Ministry of Health in Germany, to come up with initiatives from industry for short-term measures. So these would be measures that could be implemented basically with minimal or no change to the MDR itself. So by means of delegated acts, implementing acts, or just by member states just not doing things differently, for example, like really doing what they agree in the MDCG, for example. So I think there will be so in the EBSCO meeting preparation process, which is literally ongoing as we speak, there will be a lot of interesting discussions specifically on this point, because I know that Germany did their homework, and I'm not sure which other member states really also have conducted substantive exercises in that regard. Maybe France, but I know for sure that the Netherlands didn't. So and others, Italy, I'm not aware of. Poland, I'm not aware of.
So I agree. I agree. There's only a limited amount of energy going into that. The Commission is pulling hard. Notified bodies are debating heavily their position. Industry is bringing a lot of ideas about these quick wins. But I think we have to make that distinction that a lot of quick wins that we can make, the low-hanging fruit, as Eric said, they will be about how can we repurpose the safety that we know devices have. So then we talk about legacy devices. So we talk about, well, is that burden on all the clinical evidence for products 10, 15, 20 years on the market, is that really necessary? And a number of other things that we can maybe be a little bit more lenient on, because historically we've never challenged the products to be unsafe. As for innovative devices, by nature, you don't know how safe they are because they're innovative, right? They've never been on the market. The technology hasn't been on the market, or the type of material hasn't. So there's bound to be more validation. And if you do that validation in a proper way, it appears to be a smoother ride. But you have to, because otherwise nobody will buy your product, right?
Yeah.
You have to have key opinion leaders believing your new enough. Otherwise, well, it's futile to develop things.
What I also think, by the way, is one of the things that always amazes me, and that goes basically before everything else, is that, I mean, we are now looking at basically rules being changed, right? I was speaking, I've spoken to people in the devices unit of the Commission on various occasions over the last month. And if you see with how little resources these people have to do really super big tasks, this is actually, I think, bordering on the criminally insane how the Commission is under-resourced. I mean, if you compare this to the amount of people that are being thrown at pharmaceuticals policy, I think this is a really big disbalance. And I remember, actually, this has always been the case. I remember when the MDR almost entered into force. I was speaking to Eric Hansen, at the time head of unit of devices at DG Santé. And I said, hey, Eric, all these delegated acts and implementing acts, I'm sure you have a whole stack ready to go on your desk or in a drawer, right? And he was like, you think? No, I mean, we will get to this now, and we can, if we are lucky, we can make one every 6 months because we are not that many people. This was never fixed. So I think also, for me, it's still quite amazing how, especially the member states who in the end decide about the Commission's budget, for example, have never just basically moved the needle on the resources that are needed for this. And for one reason or the other, it's being taken for granted that we have a system for devices that still functions as well as it does with basically almost no people at the helm at the Commission. And I think this is also something that really needs to be looked at.
I had
Sorry for this rant in between, by the way.
That's really why we are
Yeah.
also calling for a new governance of the system, huh? And
Absolutely, yeah.
absolutely acknowledge also the fact that, I mean, how many people are in the unit of Flora Giorgio, including
8.
her? Yeah, and it's really, they're doing an amazing job. That's true, but we're calling for more.
I was in the US last month, and I've been appointed to be on a stakeholder council that's overlooking innovation in ophthalmology. And there was this moment where the head of the FDA medical devices branch was talking about regulation of software and AI in the US. And it's such a different from reality from the one that we live in. And I said to her, it was myself and like 2 other people representing Europe. And I said, why, where are the European stakeholders? And she said, well, I tried to find European regulators, but I couldn't find any. I said, well, we don't really have a European, regulatory body, and that is showing itself here, I think, when it comes to medical device, and the commission is trying to do this and is under-resourced, et cetera. And the MDCG comes out, every 6 months with a new guideline, and we all scramble to incorporate it.
I think it's more than that. If you add all the regulators together, it would be a decent bunch of people. If they all spoke from the same hymn sheet, if we agree on all the content, and it doesn't matter if you get someone from the Danish authority or someone from the commission, or I don't mind who then goes in. If they all say the same thing, they believe in the same thing, and they make the same thing happen, it would be okay. But I think the problem lies in that we are, in many cases, not directly, I'll say this very political, not directly on the same footing on any decision, basically, on any direction. And that needs to be fought out internally. But some of that internal discussion within Europe finds its way to the outside world. That is what the outside world sees. That not be an agreement, and we can't trust whatever anyone says, because if we ask someone else, there might be a different answer. And I think that uniformity in our view is going to be crucial as part of the new governance. And if there will be an additional element of governance, I think the structure of getting one voice from Europe is the most important one, because then we can make a sense. And then it doesn't matter if some of the people working in that system are residing in the member states, or if it's all central, or how we organize it. As long as we speak in one voice, we get our act together, and on each of the topics we have our joint positions, and everyone buys into that.
Yep, I agree.
That's one of the crucial points, huh? Ever since the beginning, this harmonized or not harmonized way of interpreting things, be it at notified body level. I think now we're at 50 notified bodies under the MDR, and potentially 50 different ways of interpreting a guidance document or something like that. But I think, I don't know if it was you, Gert, or Eric, you also have the competent authorities or the designating authorities who are behind them, and who also potentially have all these divergent views. I remember, for example, during the COVID time, we were strongly advocating for virtual audits being made possible. And then there was this white paper from the European Commission that almost no one applied. And then this notified body was applying it because their competent authority was more pragmatic and was really understanding the challenges that manufacturers and notified bodies had for audits. And then we had a very, very, how can I say, strict way of interpreting the MDR. If it's not in the legal text, then we won't apply it. That's simple as that, even if there's a COVID pandemic. So yeah, all these diverging views should be sort of eliminated and have a harmonized view. I think that's a crucial point to increase the efficiency of our system.
But it's based on the same issue that is underlying all of our trouble. Also, the whole transition area elements of basically not trusting what happened before. And I think that trust issue has been becoming more and more obvious in the last few years. And I would say that this is a trust issue as well. Part of why we needed to have unannounced visits, part of why we need to have foot on the ground by these notified bodies, in the view of many authorities, is that we can't trust unless we verify. And if you verify only with a virtual connection and people with fake backdrops and whatever, they can be in a hotel room anywhere. They can be in a production site which belongs to their neighbor, right? And so on. And so in that sense, it's much more difficult to verify that trust could have been granted. And I do believe that we should be better than that. I think Europe is proving itself. If you now look at the television shows that are still looking at, well, what is the real problem in medical devices? They still go back to issues that were happening 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Nothing else came to light, apparently. We can be trusted again. And if we get authorities into that mindset, that we can trust each other again, that we can trust manufacturers, that we can trust notified bodies, that would really be one of the key elements that a new governance system can bring. But it's based on trusting the system, based on then also starting to trust some of that legacy data, some of the historic clinical data, performance data, and so on for these devices. But we don't allow ourselves, we don't believe we can trust each other. And I think that is where still the key issue is. And that's also then, in my view, where the solution should start.
Completely agree.
Me too.
Yeah.
Not gonna, yeah. You know, and I think, Garrett, you probably see this as well as we do. The variance when you're working with notified bodies and companies come to you and they've got this notified body or that notified body, and you, a lot of times you can't, if it's one of the smaller ones, you don't necessarily know how to predict how they're going to react to things. And all you can do is pull out your standard playbook and hope for the best. But you can't necessarily, especially on legacy, you can't necessarily assure them that all's going to be fine.
No,
And yeah, Eric certainly, you know, like you, Eric has helped us too on cases like that. And you know, you win some, you lose some, but it's really a tough, especially for smaller manufacturers, it's a tough conversation.
Yeah, and I think one of the problems with this is that in the basis, notified body system is basically it's a very efficient way of regulating products, right? Because as competent authorities, basically what you do is you delegate a lot of work to the market in the assumption that actually the market will function, meaning that notified bodies will compete on price and quality. And you would like them to compete on quality within very strictly defined bandwidths because you don't want the quality to differ too much. Sounds nice in theory. But then when you start to ask really weird things of notified bodies at the same time, and then also put in place a transitional regime that basically disrupts the functioning of that market, because mind you, before the MDR, this market worked very well. It worked so well that when they interviewed manufacturers for the MDR impact assessment, manufacturers said, no, we want to keep our notified bodies because they are relatively low cost and very efficient. We want to keep things this way. We don't want centralization. Yeah. So the problem is that basically due to the choices that were made, and I think especially in the transitional regime of the MDR, the notified body market got so disrupted that you got all the bad things that you get in a market that doesn't function. So basically, no competition on price anymore. So we saw prices skyrocket. Also, no competition on other aspects anymore. So speed of service, things like that. And at the same time, also the notified bodies were reinventing themselves, causing situations, or they were on a wait because they had to wait before they could accept new application files until their accreditation dropped. So the whole market there was also disrupted. And I think this goes back to Gert's trust issues. I think that this disruption of the notified body market basically destroyed much of the trust that was there, at least between industry and notified bodies. I think it has destroyed it in a very bad way, and has led to unnecessary polarization between industry and notified bodies, but also between authorities and notified bodies, where you typically saw authorities being very happy with the buck always being passed on to the notified bodies as being to blame for the system that didn't function, whereas basically this was not their choice that things would happen this way.
So perhaps we should go back to one of the things that was debated heavily but didn't make it into the MDR. That was part of trying to solve this element of distrust. And I guess Merlin is going to frown when I say special notified bodies. These were these funny situations where for higher risk products, and we don't have to look at all the details there, but for higher risk products, bringing the notified bodies that were capable of reviewing and auditing these type of products, bringing them together under the wing of kind of a central control, to control the content and to control the minimum processes and the procedures and the documentation structures that these special notified bodies would follow. Had we gone into that direction, there would have been some level of harmonization, because probably for most of these notified bodies, it would have been the best way to use the same process everywhere. And probably all the others would have following the same process and to some extent the same interpretation. And we don't have to go back to these special notified bodies, but that structure, that thinking of how can we bring a mandatory process to notified body reviews, to audits, how can we bring a mandatory structure to technical documentations, how can we streamline the interpretation, a governance structure like we had proposed for that special notified bodies could be the solution, not fully a central agency, perhaps. We can still continue to use the notified bodies. If we get rid of the diversification in their methods, methodology, listening to their own member states on what they have to do and so on, bring that back together in the light of what was the intention of these special notified bodies, I think we could make a great step forward.
But also in response to what you were saying, Eric, we indeed, there was challenges with notified bodies, etc. But right now, when we're talking, at least from our perspective, the central structure that should manage the system, kind of like the idea of the captain of the ship. We don't want to get rid of notified bodies. Now, that's also something that people misunderstand, that we would have only one central agency dealing with everything. That's absolutely not what we're, at least at the present time, that we're asking. And I don't think in the future, we want to keep the notified bodies. It's just a question of how do we improve the efficiency and how the system, and how do we, ensure regulatory coherence and have this central structure, whatever it is. Also, as you were saying, Chris, earlier, represent Europe to the outside world, also to have a face and not go to here. I think the system is simply too complex at the present time, with too many actors going in all directions, and so we have to streamline it in a certain sense. Also, I mean, I hear members saying, when there's a dispute, who do I go to? Am I going to sue the notified body? No, I don't want to do it. Am I going to the competent authority? Yeah, we do, but then they
good luck with that.
Go back to the notified body, and then it goes. We're going around in circles, and Sorry, just say that.
Yeah, no problem. I think one of the other interesting policy options that was on the table at the time of the impact assessment, in addition to Gert's special notified bodies, was one that I found personally also interesting. And that is basically to have a central double check on a certification recommendation, because currently what we've also seen is that there is quite a long wait, and sometimes also unexplainable long wait, between a notified body basically finishing the conformity assessment procedure and then the certification board of a notified body signing off on the certification recommendation. So one of the policy options that was on the table at the time, that was also looked at for the impact assessment, was to have to basically do a central double check on certification recommendations. That would basically solve two problems. It would solve the problem of harmonization, but also it would solve the problem that Merlin just discussed, like if you have a conflict with your notified body, where do you go? Well, in that case, you could basically appeal the decision of the central authority that has vetted the notified body's certification decision. Another way, of course, would be to basically treat notified bodies as any national authority that exercises state authority, and to say, look, a certification decision is an administrative decision that you can appeal in administrative court, like you would normally do if somebody refuses a building license or revokes your driving license or whatever, or revokes your marketing authorization if it's a drug. So that would also be an option, but you would need some kind of centralization, I think, also there. Because, and this is something that also I think is not properly accounted for in the system at this moment, that it's not a market as such certification, because these notified bodies do exercise state authority, right? They determine the rights and obligations of citizens, and they give you a license literally. So that's government activity, which should also be subject to the constitutional controls that you have on government activity.
So you're wearing a gray sweater, Eric. So you're moving into the gray zone, and of course you're aware of that. That one example that you're alluding to is based on the concept of the CHMP, where under wing of the EMA, these central decisions are being made. When individual, member states in that case could have been notified bodies, bring a recommendation to have a market approval to that central body. And I'm sure there's going to be beneficial elements of looking at, well, which of these concepts can be transcribed into a more transparent and faster, but also more aligned decision-making process, because one central system would be able to compare apples to apples. They would see the 20 competitors with very similar products, all seen by the same final decision-making board. So there's definitely a lot of benefits, but I'm sure there will also be a lot of elements that are less helpful, because it would be a huge task and it would be a huge administration. If you compare the number of products that go through an EMA CHMP, if you compare that to the number of certification decisions that all notified bodies together are making on a weekly basis.
Absolutely.
That is unmanageable basically by an administrative task. So can we get some of the benefits out of that system, the improvements we get, and put it in a smarter system? I think then we would be making some improvements.
Yeah, I think we would need more of a hybrid system than what I just described. But this was also one of the policy options at the time, and I agree with you that the problem with devices is the sheer number of procedures. So whatever we do in terms of centralization, it needs to have more than 8 people. That is definitely definitely my recommendation.
You need a few hundred people, but if we then have a few hundred people, maybe one of the first starts to simplify matters is to get rid of the 150 guidance documents and put them in a handbook, right? Have one document of our truth instead of all these documents that so many manufacturers don't know their way around. SMEs, innovators, they have no clue where to start reading 150 guidance documents. Put it in a manual, and they will know what to do more easily, and so on. So some simple things can also do, well, some administrative thing that maybe even an AI tool can organize for us.
Yeah, or how about just having adopted some of the things that went into this huge pile of guidance documents by implementing ACT as could have been possible under the MDR and the IVDR in the first place. I mean, I was always amazed, and this is now I'm going to say my personal opinion on this, but I am always amazed by the degree to which the NDCG, if you look at what is the task of the NDCG, it's to advise the Commission and to contribute to the development of guidance and some other tasks. just because the Commission is so completely under-resourced, the MDCG was able to basically hijack the whole rollout process of the, oh, these are my words, of the MDR and the IVDR to such an extent that they were able to get away with, I think, one of the largest operations of pseudo legislation we've ever seen in the history of medical devices. So from a constitutional perspective, I also think this is deeply flawed. So when I saw the MDR for the first time, I was like, okay, finally we get, with all these options for the Commission, I thought, wow, the Commission really negotiated well in the legislative process. Now we are really going to see some nice centralized activity. Didn't happen. Why? Because the Commission wasn't able to. Like, for example, the fact that we have a specific clause in the MDR for borderline products, to take decisions by means of implementing act on groups of products. The fact that this has never been used and we still have the Helsinki procedure shows to me that the system isn't functioning as intended.
Very true.
So I agree with Gert that one of the really important things is to integrate a lot of this guidance in a new text of the MDR and the IVDR, just to make it more workable. And when it's in a single body of text, whether or not in the annexes to the regulation, you can really work with it because it's a unified body of rules.
Yeah, that's also one of the core things that we're advocating for, to put this into to have measures or even the structured dialogue. I mean, it is in some way in the MDR, but not the way we want it. And to increase the predictability, to push for measures that have legal weight. So writing it into maybe not the 120 guidance documents that we have. I can't remember who said that, but for every new guidance that's being written, please delete 10 or something. I think that would be a good
or delete them all and put them in the manual, right? But anyway, that is cut all. And I think one thing that is clear in all kinds of organization is that we understand what they have to make decisions in layers, right? You can't have a management board of a large company consisting of 50 people and then having efficient decision-making processes. And that is one of the key issues that we see. We have too many people that are kind of equal in our central European decision-making process for that. MDCG has so many people that it automatically turns more to in a brainstorming and discussion board, which could be fine, but making decisions by a smaller team, being supported by larger teams that advise, that brainstorm, that bring the technical knowledge and so on, could be so much more effective than trying to get every vote to count, but then everyone to also talk about every little detail, right? So we're setting ourselves up for failure in this system that we have bought as I'll use a little bit more political words than Eric does, but yeah. So if we start looking at more effective ways of decision making in a smaller team, smaller groups, but then trust them to make the right decision based on all the inputs that have been received, that could be part of that new world.
Yeah, and have a situation where it goes beyond guidelines to, as Eric says, implementing acts, because one of the variables with notified bodies is their interpretation of a guideline, or whether they will stick to that guideline that you may be basing your submission, your argument on. They may disagree with it because it is simply a guideline and not an implementing act or part of the law. And that's certainly something that companies that you can encounter. And the other thing I would just like to advocate for, I don't know how the three of you feel about it, but having pre-submission meetings would be, getting to the point where we can have discussions with the regulators, the competent authorities, notified bodies, where we can have discussions about, especially when it's an innovative technology, instead of guessing.
So I fully agree with that, but we have to go back to having that done with the decision maker, which in the current system is the notified body. So you now see that some of these early discussions and so on are being held, but they're held by the expert committee under the wing of the EMA. now also for combination products, and there's a few moving into innovation, the latest program, but we're talking with different people than the people that have to make a decision, and whatever comes out of these early pre-sub meetings is not binding at all to the final decision makers. And so if we can get that right, so that it's kind of the early decision and early process guidance from these notified bodies, that would make life so much easier, because then you have a steady flow of information and a steady flow towards a positive decision.
Merlin, you were going to say something?
Yeah, discussion with notified bodies is one of our key. I mean, this idea also came up in this famous MDCG 2022-14. It's been published, I don't know, 3 years ago or 2.5 years ago, and another great example of how Europe is united in diversity, or diverse in its unity. I don't know, but so many different ways of approaching it. So absolutely agree, this is key, and we're even going as far as saying whatever is discussed during this pre-submission meeting, as you call it, should be binding. So potentially you agree on the timelines that will take for the review for the conformity assessment procedure. What are the timelines? And the other thing is the cost also. And this in a binding document that binds both the European Commission, the notified body, and the manufacturer. I think that's key. And I know that Team NB has recently updated their code of conduct, and they're sort of hinting at what can be done and what cannot be done during such a structured dialogue. That's how it's called, structured. I don't know. And unfortunately, it does not include a discussion about clinical strategy. This is one of the key things for our industry, to be able to have more clarity on that, and that is not included there. So that's something from our perspective that can be improved.
But it's not excluded from these discussions. It just means if it's not in the Team NB paper, it means that they didn't agree on a common position. But if you look at individual notified bodies and their discussions, depending on how you bring it, right, you can't ask them, do I have to do 100 or 200 patients in my study? And what endpoints do I need? But if part of your whole submission strategy is a clinical protocol, they're going to say something about it. Most of them. Depending, as Eric said, on which country the notified body is located.
Yeah, fair point. I know we're coming up on time. The last question that I wanted to pose to the group is about what can manufacturers do better? How can they be involved? How can they advocate for getting some of these changes we've discussed moved forward? And Garrett, I want to start with you because you're involved with the Regulatory Affairs Professional Society, RAPS. And I came across a statistic. I was working on I had to deliver an MDR presentation. And I came across a statistic that said that 75% of all applications to notified bodies are incomplete. So is that a starting point? Can manufacturers make it easier on the notified bodies and therefore the whole process by putting in the right getting it complete submissions, doing it right the first time?
Well, you can see that there's a learning curve there. I think it's slightly improving, but then still a lot of them are failing to meet all criteria. And so in some cases, it's just okay. Someone has a different opinion. They have some additional technical questions. And obviously that goes in the bucket like, well, something was wrong. But more easy, and quite a few of them, there is just someone forgot to put the declaration of conformity in, or the risk assessment plan wasn't there. Yes, there's risk assessment, but the plan was forgotten, right? Simple things like it's in the list of checkbox, you have to deliver that. These simple things can be prevented. But the second layer of improvement is that by now we know a lot of things. We know what is a good clinical evaluation report. We know what is a sound statistics of a clinical study. So if you prepare well, and I think everyone can try and prepare well, it is even possible these days, even with the largest notified bodies, to get a clinical evaluation report through without any question from the notified body, if you prepare well. Now, not everyone has that space and time or money or whatever to prepare super well. but getting rid of the funny mistakes that should have been prevented by not providing the documents, by providing documents that cannot be searched, right? That's one of these criteria. You have PDFs, you can't photocopy something and then put it in a PDF. That's not good enough anymore. They should be searchable, right? And these are the type of mistakes that make it into that big bucket. Yes, some really screwed up, but the majority are simple things that could have been fixed or are easily fixed afterwards. A second thing, and we've seen that a lot, and luckily we see that less, is that people botch their first review round, right? They didn't bring a full dossier in, but then they get a long list of deficiencies, and they just don't answer half of the deficiencies because they think the notified body should have asked that, right? But that when you have 2 rounds, 2.5 rounds, whatever, right? And if you botch your first round, there's only one chance left to get it right. So it is also that level of preparedness, but also the willingness to engage, even if, in your opinion, a notified body asks a stupid question, just give them what they want, because that is the easier route.
Listen to your regulatory consultant and give the notified bodies what they want. It's pretty simple. Eric, what about you?
Yeah, I must say I agree with Gert basically on everything he said. Now, what I often see to add to it is a lack of training and fundamental understanding of European regulation with quite a lot of my international clients. And this is always a management choice as well. Sometimes you really see regulatory departments being very under-resourced. And sometimes you also see, if you ask them like, yes, but what is your management's thinking behind this? They can, that sometimes I'm a bit shocked how mercenary management can be, and where you have to almost help the regulatory department to get some traction in the company for, hey guys, this is really important that we get this right. It's not like we're going to Disneyland here or something, and you don't need to be prepared or something. It's like this is a serious process, and if you screw it up, it has serious consequences. So I think this is quite important. I think the lack of training is also sometimes quite apparent in people that you see work at notified bodies. Unfortunately, I've had some dealings with cases where the notified body auditor was really completely wrong on the law. And in those cases, I think one of the big issues with notified bodies that it is very difficult for the notified body to quickly correct something like that, and that is unfortunate. So this is definitely something I think should be improved, and where notified bodies can also really improve their own quality control processes by making it not necessary to go over their head to the competent authority and then have the competent authority tell them, yes, you were wrong. This could really be a lot more customer friendly and quicker. Yeah, and in the end, I would say everybody be wise. I mean, really try to understand the system and not see each other as enemies, because everybody has a job to do in the whole system. And in the end, everybody also has the same goal, I think, and that is get good products to the market to improve things for everybody. And this mindset is also often a bit lost. It would be nice if people could do their best to get along a bit better and also do their best to understand each other. For example, in structured dialogues. Yeah.
And Merlin, from MedTech Europe's standpoint, what can manufacturers do to help?
I would agree with the idea of the dialogue, definitely. And then you were talking about the, I don't know, did you say quality of the files or?
The statistic was 75% of submissions are incomplete. And I think to Gert's point, it's probably things that they've forgotten to put in. like, declarations of conformity are one that I've seen before. Yeah. And
Could I
yep.
add just one little point there, Marilyn? Sorry.
Sure.
I think one of the problems that is also plaguing us on this point is the lack of a good, detailed, standardized template for technical documentation, like the ECTD that we have for medicines, for example. This would be such a good way to prevent preventable errors in submission documentation. Sorry, Marilyn, over to you.
No, I think you're bringing up a very, very good point, and this also points in the direction of one of the solutions that we're suggesting is to digitize as much as possible the submissions, with standard way of submitting, and this is something that's really needed. In our recent survey, we have asked our members or the companies that have answered the survey to evaluate the amount of time they're spending in the pre-review phase, the conformity assessment, and the post. And we saw that over 50% of the time is spent in post review. So conformity, this all should be administrative stuff, right? So pretty easy, actually. So once your product has been reviewed, you still have 25% of time, and pre-review, it's also 25% of time. So I guess with the dialogue, obviously there's a learning curve. I guess it also depends on which companies you're talking about, because we don't necessarily see these issues with regards to having challenges with bigger companies. Maybe you're talking more about small and medium enterprises who maybe don't have the necessary, again, the learning curve, but the necessary training and be able to invest a lot of money in hiring the right people. So I guess that would also be something that should be done, and that's also why, as MedTech Europe, we're suggesting to make this whole thing more predictable and to lower the cost for compliance with regards to the MDR and IVDR. And maybe one last thing, just in terms of education, that comes to mind. You could join your national association if you're an SME, or at EU level, you could join a trade association like MedTech Europe, for example, because we try to provide as much guidance to our members as possible. And that helps you, obviously, to prepare for MDR and IVDR.
Great. Thank you. So I really appreciate the three of you taking the time to talk with us today on the Business of iNovation podcast. I think we could probably go on for another hour, but let's spare the listener. Easily. Yeah, I'm thinking, when does the commission have to report back, Eric? Is that the end of January?
Commission report back on what exactly?
Wasn't there something when the Parliament tabled, there was a request for an assessment?
First quarter.
First quarter.
They asked them to basically get a move on and make stuff happen in the first quarter so not report back, but do actual stuff.
Do something.
Right? Different thing in first quarter of 2025. So, I mean, ideally, what would happen is that the EBSCO meeting rallies the member states, and then all the member states go like, yes, action. Commission, go, go, go. Do this, do that, do here. We are completely behind it. This is in line with the Parliament's joint resolution. Hey ho, let's go. This would be ideal, because that would also allow the Commission to actually go do something about the low-hanging fruit. Question is if the Commission is able to do that, because only 8 people.
8 people. So the solution is, if member states buy into this, each of them send 1 or 2 people to Brussels for a year. You can see what you can do. It's that easy.
It's crowdsourcing.
Yeah.
It is.
Well, and it's actually completely normal. I mean, the EMA is also basically almost completely crowdsourced by the member states. So why not do that here? Exactly. And I mean, the NDCG doesn't count for crowdsourcing, because that is a different body with a different function. So I would not want the NDCG on this task, because they don't have a stellar reputation for acting quickly. Or consistently, or coherently, and so on.
So there's the call to action.
The next EBSCO is really going to be interesting to watch.
I would say it's make or break, Merlin.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably not the last EBSCO, right, where
No.
IVDR will be discussed, but
Probably
no.
not.
No, if you look back, every Christmas we always had, if last year, the year before, we
Yes.
always were in the same situation, and where member states were giving the mandate to the European Commission to do something. At that time, it was, prolonging the transition time, which was always very welcome. But now what we need to do is to solve the root causes of these challenges we see in both regulations. No more time anymore. No, don't postpone anything. Just solve the challenges. That's what we're asking for in the end.
Yeah, it would be nice if they could just say, look, we member states are in favor of doubling the headcount of the devices unit. I mean, or tripling it. That would already be a really good start. Or an essential element of doing anything effective, I should rather say.
Can I add one more call to action, slightly diverging from this? I know that we're talking a lot about, well, what could be made simpler? How could we streamline the processes? How could we get on these quick wins and so on? But even getting the quick wins will take quite some time before they are implemented, I would assume. And so what we see is a number of manufacturers put on the brake on all the submissions they have with the notified body, even the ones that are running in the review. And I do believe that even though we will see improvements coming hopefully soon and definitely a bit later, it is not always the wisest decision to put your applications and your processes on hold, right? Get going, keep that action, and we'll get there in time. Because if everyone stops, that doesn't add trust, and that might make it more difficult to achieve these improvements in the system, right? So keep on going, keep the foot on the gas in that sense. That will support the system to ultimately have more trust and therefore be more smooth.
Thank you, Merlin, Eric, and Gerrit for joining us on Business of Innovation podcast today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.